This program was first broadcast on Canterbury's access media station, Plains FM, and was made with the assistance of New Zealand On Air.
Hello everybody, and welcome to God is Not Absent, a podcast in which we share stories of faith in the lives of young people today. This podcast is hosted by me, Apurva Patel-Kana, a young woman who has embarked on her own journey with God and is incredibly curious to know if God really is as dead or as absent as many Westerners nowadays seem to think so. Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of God is Not Absent. This week we have a very special guest, Scott McKenzie. Hey Scott, so how's it going? Tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Apurva. I appreciate the invite. Before we get into it, I must say it's quite a thing to be appearing on a podcast called God is Not Absent. It's not something that I thought I would ever do, so it is, quite amazing.
Awesome.
So, all is well. I've, been having a good day, and, it's good to be on here.
Mm-hmm. And how was your lockdown experience?
Yeah, it was quite an experience. I live with myself, so I don't live with anyone else. So, that made it a unique experience in that, I was basically stuck in with myself for every hour of the day. But, no, I merged with my parents' bubble, so, no, that made it manageable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah, so Scott and I, we know each other from church. Again, I just bring everyone I know from church onto this podcast. Scott, one thing that I just realised that you have a really cool faith, and you're really involved in our church, and I guess I just realised that I didn't know much about your faith and your story, unlike some of the past guests that I've had on this podcast. I guess I'll just start off with, do you want to tell me about your life? Like, what is your family like? Did you grow up in Christchurch? What's your life like?
Yeah, sure. So I had a fairly typical Kiwi childhood. I grew up in a family of 4 children and with a mum and dad who were together. So I suppose that bit's not as typical as it used to be in New Zealand. But everything was pretty smooth for me growing up. There I was living in Christchurch for most of my life, other than a few stints in Australia where, we spent some time in the Gold Coast, like as many Kiwis have done in the past. Mm-hmm. So, other than that, most of my childhood was spent, being involved in sport and watching sport of some kind. I was quite a sporting fanatic. In terms of faith, I had no faith whatsoever because, I did grow up in a secular environment, and this was the case with my family and really schooling and, just my friend group. We just had no faith whatsoever, so I wasn't exposed to, Christianity or any faith really.
Mm-hmm. So that was your childhood. Then when did you actually become exposed to your faith?
So I think the first time where I started to at least hear about God and the gospel was at high school, where I met Jeremy Aiken. And I would know that you do know who Jeremy is as well, and many of the listeners would. And obviously you've had a couple of his sisters on here. I'm looking forward to maybe Jeremy appearing on here at some stage as well. But so meeting Jeremy, he always mentioned his faith and brought up God. And he always did it in a way that he didn't make it seem like it was a bore or, anything that was really a chore. So he made it appealing in that sense. So at that time when I was in high school, I didn't really probe further into his faith. I didn't really take it much further than just hearing what he had to say. But it did leave an impression on me, and later in life, obviously that played an important part in my conversion.
Mm-hmm. So did you go to youth group or anything in high school, or did you just hear it from Jeremy?
No, I didn't. I did know that Jeremy went to youth group, as he always did mention it, and did have some of my other friends come along with him to youth group, but I never really took that opportunity to attend youth group, and it wasn't really anything that interested me at the time. I feel like I was distracted with various other things, so the opportunity was presented, but I never really took it up.
So then what brought you back to Christianity later on in life? When was that?
So I think it started maybe after I left high school, when I started to become a bit more of my own person. I think as you leave high school there, you start to research and form your own beliefs as you are separated from people your own age somewhat. So you start to become a bit more independent. So as I left high school, I did take it upon myself to do some research into what I really believe. And this started really through my interest in politics. So I started to read various political books, and this led on to reading about Christianity. As through my study of politics and various things, I started to see that Western civilization really is built on the framework of Christianity. So from that study, it led me into looking into Christ and Christianity and theology in general. And so I read many books and that. And one of the key ones was a book by C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. And this book,
gosh, yes.
It's a very good book, and it started to make me question what I believe and why I hadn't previously thought that there was a God, and this started to change my belief. So initially I started to believe in a God. It wasn't necessarily the Christian God at that point, but I couldn't remain an atheist after reading that book, and through a few more steps where I started to look out into the world, and I started to think to myself that there were a lot of things that I didn't agree with. So why did I have such strong thoughts about what was going on if I didn't have some sort of morality and an objective morality? So this led to, I think, myself becoming a bit self-righteous in the sense that I was becoming quite judgmental, and I wasn't looking in on myself. So then there was a moment there where I think God got involved in my life, where I started to look inward and see the sin that was present in myself as well, and that I wasn't immune to being sinful. So this led me to opening up the Bible and really digging into it, and that's where I read about the story of Jesus, and it just really clicked with me, and it was a beautiful story. And since then I've started to attend church and do other activities involved in the church community.
That is actually so cool to learn, because I've never known this about you, Scott. It's really cool. I think something that speaks to me is actually, I think your story is quite similar to mine. Like, I also had that same journey of, trying to figure out who God is. And I kind of believed in some kind of God, but I don't know if the Christian God was the true God. And so I read Mere Christianity as well. Guys, read Mere Christianity.
Definitely recommend that one.
What was it? So, you kind of shared a lot in that section, but I kind of want to take it back to, I guess, reading that book, Mere Christianity. What were some of the foundational things that you got out of that book that kind of are still part of the foundation of your faith at the moment?
So I think one of the key parts of that book was C.S. Lewis running through the fact that everyone does believe that there is some morality and that there is right and wrong. So that belief isn't really compatible with atheist philosophy, because if everything is just material and there's nothing more than that, then everything really is subjective. So that made me start to see that the conscience that we all do have must have been put there by someone, and this led me to obviously believe in a God. So that was one of the bigger chapters as part of that book. The other one was where C.S. Lewis ran through what we would expect from a God that entered into the world, if that is what happened. And he really explained that the Christian God of Jesus is really exactly what would be the case if there is a God that's interested in human affairs.
That is really cool. And I also want to take it a little bit even further back to what you were talking about. So you're saying that you were interested in politics, and that's kind of how you started exploring Christianity a lot more. Can you expand on kind of that transition? Like, how is it that you encountered Christianity while studying politics?
Sure. So my viewpoints in the world of politics were all quite strong, and I had strong arguments for them, but these arguments were based in logic and rationality, but they didn't have the foundation of a God. And if there isn't any God, then all viewpoints are subjective, and one person's viewpoint can't really be any more valid than another person's viewpoint. So that's why I started to look into it more and just question why I was so strongly opposed to various things and strongly for other things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Change the topic a little bit, but I was just wondering, what are your long-term goals, and have these goals changed since you became a Christian?
Yes, so currently I'm working in the banking industry, so this is something that I have been interested in entering into from a young age, as I've always had an aptitude for numbers and money. So I'm currently in the industry that I have always wanted to be in. But I think as I've become a Christian, I've started to not put as much of a priority on that. So I see it more as a means to an end rather than an end in of it itself. So I think that I would like to remain in the same industry, but really start to act in the industry in a way that does honour Christ. So this is obviously through acting with integrity and hopefully through my work bringing people to Christ.
Mm-hmm. And I was also wondering, you've had a really cool journey of, not really caring about Christianity to being exposed with Jeremy and then exploring it yourself. And I was wondering, what was your opinion of Christianity before you became a Christian? And how did you see Christians? How did you see that religion?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I would say for most of my life, I didn't really have too strong of a view either way, as I just really never was exposed to God or the gospel, as I mentioned earlier. So my viewpoints weren't strong, but I'd say, if anything, the preconceived view of Christianity was that it was just old writings from a far past time that had no relevance to us in the now. So I think what got me out of that view was just seeing that what was going on back then wasn't too much different to what is going on now. So obviously it's easy to look back at the past and see all the sin and wrongdoing that was in the world, but if you really take a look at what's happening now, you see a lot of the same stuff happening, even though it might be in a different form. So just seeing that the current time isn't too much different to that time period really made me start to believe that even though the writings are obviously over 2,000 years old, they still have relevance to the now. That's
awesome. Yeah. I think, I completely agree with everything that you're saying, really. Really cool insights. And so, that was kind of your perception about Christianity. But how do you think other people's perception of you has changed since you became a Christian?
Yes, so since I've become a Christian, I have changed in a lot of ways. So I think most of this is through my mindset. So before I was a Christian, I feel like I was a lot more erratic and volatile. But since I've become a Christian, I'm more grounded now, as I have that sense of there being a God and that whatever happens in the world, He's still there for me. So even through the low times, which inevitably do come, I can turn to God as my refuge. So this means that I don't get too carried away. And that's the same when good things are happening as well. It keeps me grounded. So before I was a Christian, things weren't that way. When I was in a low point, things were very low. And when there were those high times, things were all good. But there was still a sense of there must be more. So the key there would be, since I've become a Christian, I think people would see me as more grounded and more peaceful.
So you're saying that when things go bad, you kind of have that eternal perspective in mind and know that God is there for you? Is that kind of what's changed?
Yeah, that's right, because obviously God's a stable force, so even when things are changing, he's there, so he's always there to turn to. So yeah, that's right.
And yeah, I guess if we shift more into kind of the personal aspects of your faith, how would you describe your relationship with God? Is it intellectual, emotional? What's it like?
So I'd say it's a bit of both. So intellectualism, I think it can take you so far. It can obviously, as it did in my case, lead you to believing in a God, but I don't think it can take you all the way in to the point of trusting God fully. So yeah, it's a bit of both in that sense. I would say I do rely on my intellect a lot, but reading the Bible and seeing what God's done for me, I feel like it does lead me to embrace him in more an emotional sense as well. So yeah, there's both those components there.
And what are some unanswered questions that you have about your faith? What are some things that you still struggle with at the moment?
One of the big ones, I think, would be the presence of suffering in the world, large suffering. Obviously, Jesus himself died on the cross and suffered, so there is that comfort in the fact that he experienced what a lot of us experience. But through my life, my family especially has had some periods of great trials. And yeah, just putting that in the context of there being a God can be difficult at times. So that's probably the one that I'm still working through, but it doesn't take away from my faith at all.
And I was wondering, actually, you mentioned ages ago that you felt, you were talking about how you felt quite self-righteous and God was pointing that out to you. What was that moment like? Was that the first time you experienced God in a personal way?
Yeah, I do believe that was the first big God moment in my life, because up until that point, I did think of myself as a good person. So seeing all the sin that that was in me was quite an experience. And yeah, it did change me from that point on, and did lead me to embracing Christ as the one that took our sins on the cross there, and yeah, saved us from our sin.
And have you had many more God moments like that, where it's like super clear what God is trying to say to you, or how do you hear from God in your own life?
Yeah, so since that point, I have obviously stayed close to the Bible. So this is how I get access to God mostly. So through reading the Bible, there's been many God moments in the sense that just reading various passages makes me realize what he can do for us. And by taking that on board, I feel like this has changed my life, and that it's removed a lot of sin that was there and has continued to bring me closer and closer to Christ.
That's so cool. I love it. I love your faith, Scott. It's so interesting hearing more about it. And yeah, you talked about the Bible and how that's kind of a stable force in your faith. And would you like to share, do you have any Bible verses or anything that have stood out to you?
Yes, so the big one that I return to a lot is 2 Timothy 1:7. Yes, so the big one that I do keep returning back to is 2 Timothy 1:7, and that's God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. And this just really reminds me and drives home the point that God doesn't leave us alone in our weakness. He gives us his spirit, which provides those things, which we can use in our lives to live righteous lives and also bring other people to Christ.
Amen to that. Okay, Scott, what would you recommend for someone that is just starting out in their faith, or maybe they're an atheist, they're kind of exploring their own beliefs? What would you recommend they do?
Yeah, I'd say the first step would really be to start questioning your assumptions and presumptions on the big issues of life. I'd say what was the case with me was that I had all these beliefs, but I hadn't really thought too much about them. I'd really just taken them from authority leaders and lived my life believing in things they hadn't thought too much about. So if they start to question some of the big assumptions, such as how we got here and why we have such strong sense of morality, then this might start to put questions in their mind and will lead them to hopefully answers on them, which could eventually lead them on the same journey that I've gone on.
And for people that are already Christians, how would you recommend they evangelize to other people and share their faith?
My biggest recommendation would be to drive home to people that they are sinful and that their sense that there is something wrong is right, and then this will hopefully lead them to the point where they'll be able to bring up in their conversations with people that there is a Christ who saves.
Awesome. All right, Scott, we are coming to the end of this episode. And I guess, like every other episode, would you like to share a song with us about God, and would you like to tell us why you chose the song?
Yeah, sure. So the song that I've chosen is Psalm 34 by Shane and Shane, and the reason I've picked the song is because it doesn't sugarcoat the fact that there are trials and suffering in life, but it drives home that Jesus is there for them to turn to in these times of difficulty, and that if they turn to him, they'll be able to find comfort in that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott, for coming on this podcast. It's been incredible knowing more about your faith, and I think the journey that you've gone on will speak to a lot of other people. And just thank you so much. Well, I guess that's it for today. I hope you guys have an awesome day and enjoy the song.
I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from every fear. And those who look on him are radiant, they'll never be ashamed, they'll never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard me and saved me from my enemy. The Son of God surrounds his saints, he will deliver them, he will deliver them. Magnify the Lord with me, come exalt his name together, glorify the Lord with us bless the Lord every day and night, never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord every day and night, never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Sing with us. Let us bless the Lord every day and night, never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Let us bless the Lord every day and night, never-ending praise. May our incense rise. Come exalt